In his most recent piece, which came out today, you talk about, Albert, the toxic nature of the Rams front office. And this kind of is in reflection to Jeff Fisher's most latest press conference, in which he talked about the personnel and seemed to kind of disassociate himself from some of the personnel decisions that have been made during his tenure there. How accurate is that portrayal?
Well, I think I would tell you it's 100% accurate. I don't think, I honestly, I don't think the tension between coaches and general managers is that uncommon in the NFL. And a lot of those have become public, whether it's Balky Harbaugh or, last year, Grigson and Pagano. So you see those sorts of things. The problems arise when, I think these things a lot of times bubble to the surface when job security comes into play. And so I think that's a big part of what's happening here, and that, I think everybody in the building realizes that the temperature is being turned up now. They're 4-8 in their fifth year. They haven't had so much as a 500 season. And, when you're in that position and look, these guys have been through a lot over the last year moving to Los Angeles, heads are probably going to roll, and so there's been an issue between the head coach there and the general manager there for a few years now. This stuff kind of boils over when you've got the tension of another bad year and job security on the line, and that's kind of where they're at. And so, there's been finger pointing inside the building. There's been, blame to be assigned on X, Y, and Z going wrong, and it's really kind of become, I think, increasingly more difficult for anyone to see, the possibility that everybody's going to be intact after the end of the year.
All right, so why were they given extensions?
Well, because that was done a while ago. I know the news just broke, but that was done earlier in the year. To prevent, and we hear about this in all sports, right? Like Jeff Fisher was in the last year of his deal, and a lot of times teams philosophically don't want to send coaches into their contract years because they worry that players could wind up tuning them out. They could lose the locker room, that sort of thing. We saw it happen with Rex Ryan in New York. You might remember before his last year, they gave him an extension, which was just an extra year with an option tag onto it, and they wound up firing him anyway. So it's not unusual at all that the coaches get extensions in these situations and wind up getting fired on the other end of it. And I think the timing of the news breaking over the weekend, is interesting, but I don't think anybody should take that as a deal having just been done now. Those deals have been done for a while, and I don't think they have that much of an effect on whatever's going to happen, when we get to the end of the regular season here in 3 weeks.
You said the timing is interesting. Was that to somehow, dissolve or at least kind of a smokescreen to take away from the Eric Dickerson thing?
Yeah, there's been a lot of things that's gone on there the last few weeks, and so, between the Dickerson thing and, between Fisher's comments, it's one thing after another there now. And, I think part of it, look, and sometimes in these cases, guys, there are people who are protecting this guy or that guy. And, I think the one thing that you can say about the news getting out on Fisher, over the weekend was that, if you really want to look at it, from a cold perspective, it would help Fisher to get that news out there, because it would not make the organization look good if that news broke and then 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later, they're firing the guy. And so sometimes there are, and I'm not saying I don't think Fisher leaked it. I'm not saying that, but there are sometimes people who have those people's interests in mind, and those things happen sometimes, and that's why I think it's kind of interesting that it came to light when it came to light there, in December instead of 3 months ago, when it was actually done.
What's the general consensus about the quarterback?
I don't think they have enough information yet to know. They're encouraged, and look, he's got a long way to go, and I think they knew that when he was when they drafted him. He's a guy who only spent 3 years in college versus Carson Wentz, who spent 5 at North Dakota State, and He was coming from a spread offense, and the Baylor, basically the Baylor offense, which is, where Robert Griffin III came from, where Bryce Petty came from. We saw the learning curve with those two. And so I think, they knew when they drafted him that he had special arm talent, and that he was a kid who kind of looked the part, but he'd have ways to go. He needs to grow into his body a little bit, and he'd need to grow into being an NFL quarterback. And so, I think that, they've been encouraged what they've seen behind the scenes, but until you really get more full body of work from a guy, you just don't know, especially at that position. I mean, until you get a quarterback back there, with the threat of taking real hits, and, looking at a defense that's unscripted, I don't think you really know. And so I think that's kind of where they're at right now. And, the really interesting part about Doug is that his presence there, if they were to make changes, could affect who they're able to get, because I think a big part of that decision-making process for any prospective high-profile coach, like, say, a Jim Harbaugh or somebody like that, would be, do you like Goff or do you not like Goff?